Good evening, ladies. We're glad to have you here with us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about older women who still have their bling. And Kristiana, there you go. You unmuted yourself. Some of us were not unmuted yet. I'm Dana Burk, and I'm going to be facilitating our talk tonight. And I want to introduce each one of our ladies. Most of you know Lauren and Colleen, but you might not know Kristiana. She's been on a couple of times. Colleen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life right now?
Well, I have been doing some shopping. We have had some new babies come into our family, and I love looking at these Bible storybooks. Okay. For kids. I don't know if any of you have some.
I was going to say yours are a little young yet, but they'll grow into them, right?
Well, I already started reading to them. It's never too early to start. There are some really wonderful books out there, and fairly accurate in the. They kind of condense the Bible down. They have some fun pictures. I don't know if any of you have any suggestions for ones that you really liked, but that's what I've been doing lately.
Cool. Very cool. That's good. Now, how old are your grandbabies now?
They've just newborn.
Newborn. That's exciting.
Infants, yeah. And one on the way. So.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. What about you, Lauren?
Well, we're recording in September. I don't know when this one will end up playing. But it's our busy season. The kids are back to school and we're traveling a bunch and getting ready to take them on a trip for fall break. So we're go nonstop, it feels like these days.
Cool. And in case you noticed the last name, Kristiana Burk is my daughter. So Christy, what's going on with you?
And that we look alike and sound alike.
These minor things.
I work a lot. I just got a new role as a director of a consulting company, which I'm loving, and allows me to work from home, which is amazing. And I got new furniture today.
You got a new couch.
Yay! I'm like, it's time for me to have adult furniture. I'm 48. Like, what's the problem? So I'm just so excited because where I worship here in Atlanta, we laugh and say we have potlucks, basically we take house to house very seriously. So with the fall season, we have so many who are having babies, getting engaged, and so I'll be entertaining, and so very excited.
Very cool.
Furniture. So.
Very cool.
But with those babies, that's the thing when you buy new furniture, and then you can envision the baby spitting up on your new furniture.
Wow.
Leather.
Yeah.
You got leather.
Leather helps.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm an auntie, so I get to send them all home too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about still having our bling. And that might be hard to believe when you look at people my age and say, you still have bling. But someone had shared a story with us that a lady by the name of Martha Ladyman had written. And let me rephrase that. I met Martha many years ago when I was probably in my early 30s. And I have fond memories of her. But anyway, she has written this article called Still Got My Bling. And she talked about an elderly lady that she saw at the grocery store. She was checking out. She was heading out with her cart. And there was blocking the center of the door an elderly woman walking you can envision walking very, very, very slowly. She says that the turtles and snails left her in the dust. So it was very slow. And she said, and a line began to form, and everyone had kind of the same expression. The lady wasn't very steady on her feet, so everybody was being very polite. This is in Texas, where you are very polite. And you would never rush around an elderly person. And so it took a few moments for them to get outside. And she said, as they went outside, she noticed the lady's cane. And the cane was pitch black with crystal stones glued from top to bottom all the way around. She said every inch was covered with them. And she said, and this Texas sunshine made it just gleam. And she said the lady turned around to her and looked at her and realized that she was blocking everybody. She says, I may be old, but I still got my bling. And I love that. Y'all are all laughing. You loved it too. And she said, yes, ma'am, you do. And another lady chimed in, and they all had a good time about it. And she said, as she began to think about that over time, she began to think, there are a lot of us who have our bling. And then she wrote this article, and it was not a religious article, but I just want to share a couple of things. It said, that lady with the amazing shiny cane got me thinking, who else do I know who stared life in the face and proudly proclaimed, I may be old, but I've still got my bling. Whatever they define being as bling, talents, abilities, business sense, whatever. So then she went on to talk about a number of people that some of the names will sound familiar to you, but she talked about a Wahida Riemann, who's known for, at the age of 83, for her wildlife photography and scuba diving. Now, I'm certified to scuba dive. I know y'all cannot believe that, but I am. Advanced certification. Now, it's been years. I'd have to start all over. But I did that in my 30s and early 40s, not in my nearly 70s. And this lady's known for doing it at 83. Another one, Diana Nyad, at 64 years old, which may not seem all that old, but she became the first woman at 64 to swim the 110 miles from Cuba to Florida. I've swum a mile in the ocean against the current and thought I was gonna drown, literally, with all my scuba gear on. Did that without a shark cage. Just throw that in. Another lady, Laura Ingalls Wilder's, most of us know that name. She began writing Little House on the Prairie at the age of 65. Grandma Moses began her art career at the age of 78. 2017, Rosemary Smith became the oldest person, I love this, to drive a Formula One car. Now, I could do that. At 79. And then another lady by the name of Wally Funk joined NASA in the 60s. She was too old to be an astronaut. I mean, she was the wrong gender to be an astronaut at that time. But in 2021, at the age of 82, she went into space. Can you imagine that? And then Gladys Burrell, at the age of 86, ran her first marathon. I can't even run. She ran her first marathon, and at 96, she just completed the Honolulu Marathon.
She probably wins because there's nobody else in her category.
It doesn't say she won, it says she ran. I've done a 5K, but I walked it, just saying. Then Katherine Johnson, she was one of the few African-American women to work on the NASA program. And she even has a movie that was written about her episodes called Hidden Figures. But at her death at the age of 101, she was still giving speeches and urging young women, encouraging them to participate in the STEM program. These are these ladies had their bling going on. And the whole point of this is that in their 80s and 90s, they hadn't lost their value. There was plenty of value. And how many women do we know? How many women do you know in the church pews where you go that would fit this category, who still have some bling about them? And if they don't, and if you don't, then you need to think about, why don't I? We all have value at every age. And so tonight, I'm I want us to think about what examples we have in Scripture about that of women who had bling, who some of their greatest accomplishments even were recorded in the Scriptures for us in their old age. One other thing I want to read from this article, it says, these women in their 80s and 90s that we see in our churches and neighborhoods and around the Thanksgiving table, that means your family, they served in the Korean War, they saw the Great Depression, they saw World War II, Vietnam, Desert Storm, they lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember that. I remember Vietnam. I remember Desert Storm. They watched man walk on the moon. Colleen, you remember doing that? Or are you too young? You're too young. I remember that.
No, Neil Armstrong was from near where I live, so he was a big deal. Okay. I remember that.
Okay. I was the name. And they saw the construction and the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. And you just think about the history that they have lived through. They've been around the corner. What can they share with you? What can they teach you? What could we learn sitting at their feet? And so tonight, I want us to look at some women in the Bible that we can look at who had their bling. And I'm just going to go around. I would say go around the room, go around the camera here, and ask each of you to share. And Lauren, let's just start with you. Who did you choose to talk about tonight?
Well, I love some of the lesser known women in the Bible. And so one that my mind went to was Anna the prophetess that we meet in Luke chapter 2. We know very little about her. She only gets a couple of verses. She is told right after the Simeon story, very similar stories. One of my favorite things about Luke is his emphasis on the role of women in the life of Jesus and in the spreading of the gospel. And so we have the Simeon story, but then we immediately follow it up with a woman doing something very similar and having her part to play. But the first thing that we learn about her is that she is very old. She's not just old, she is very old. And comparatively for her time, she really was. The average life expectancy for a woman at that point in time was about 35 years old. Now that takes into account things like infant mortality and maternal mortality, dying in childbirth. Even excluding that, though, average life expectancy was still only about 50. And she was 84 years old when Jesus was born. She was very old.
Right.
But she also had lived with her husband for 7 years after their marriage. They didn't wait till they were 30 to get married, typically, back then. So we can assume she was a pretty young woman when she married. They were married for 7 years. But then he passed, and she was a widow until this day when Jesus came, when she was 84 years old. And so she lived most of her life as a widow. Doesn't say anything about having children. I think we can probably assume that she did not.
Right.
She was very alone. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have kids. And it says that she never left the temple, but worshipped night and day, fasting and praying. That was her whole life. Her whole life was living in the temple, serving and worshiping and praying. And that's what she did. And it would have been so easy. And I think a lot of widows now, regardless of age, face the problem that Anna must have faced, which is, why am I here? What purpose am I serving? What's the point? What am I doing here? And then one day she found out.
Yeah.
Because one day a couple brought their infant child to the temple, and she came up to them and she gave thanks to God and told everybody around what was special about this little baby. And we know that she's a prophetess. We know that she is inspired to speak what she did. But it was just a random Thursday. I mean, I don't know what day of the week it was, but it was a random day. She's lived in the temple for all these years, doing her thing and doing what needs to be done and living her life in a very small way, in a small corner of the world. until one day that all changed. And that's what she was there for. That's why God kept her there. So that on that day, on that random Thursday, when she's 84 years old, she gets to see the Messiah. And she has the job to tell everyone that's in the temple that day about the Messiah and who this baby is and why he's important and what he's going to do. And she lived through some really difficult times, right? The intertestamental period was not the happy fun games. And she lived through all of that for a very specific purpose. And I think that's what Anna teaches us, is that sometimes even when it's hard to see my purpose and my reason for still being here, and I've heard that a lot talking with elderly folks, especially. There was one gentleman in particular that we worshiped with for a long time, and he lived to be 96, 97 years old. Everyone he was friends with had passed already. Mm-hmm. And he would regularly say to his family, especially, I don't know why I'm still here. I don't understand why the Lord hasn't taken me yet. Right. I'm sick. I'm sitting here all day. I can't do anything. But God has a reason for keeping you here. And though our reason is not to meet the Messiah in the flesh when he's an infant, our reason, at least part of it, is to tell the people around us about the Messiah that's come. So Anna is such an inspiration to me, especially in my phase of life, that no matter how old you are, no matter how purposeless it might seem some days, God has a purpose for you.
You know, that's an interesting perspective that you put in there, because I always, because the Bible doesn't tell us, but I had always thought that was almost a reward for her loyalty to God all those years, that she was so righteous and and what a blessing. And there were many righteous people. I mean, there weren't as many as sometimes there have been, but there were. We know Simeon, and we know Mary and Joseph, and et cetera, et cetera. But that's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Lauren, she reminds me of the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm.
She found out that she had met the Messiah. She ran into town, and you couldn't keep her quiet.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Anna quiet. And you wonder if people were going, hey, keep it down.
Yeah,
that's enough. People are trying to pray here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Kristiana, who did you choose?
Yeah, so I was thinking when you were talking, Lauren, God used her because she was doing what he wanted her to do anyway, and so the woman that I chose is a little unconventional maybe, but it's the elect lady in 2 John. So we don't actually know how old she was, but she had children. Some people say that this might be metaphorical, talking about the church. But as I read through it and kind of dug into some things, I believe it was an individual that the Apostle John was talking about. I've always found her mysterious and interesting. And as I was rereading through it, it was obvious that she had a close relationship with John. In fact, 2 John opens up and says, greeting from the elder. That's how he refers to himself. To the lady chosen by God and to her children, I truly love all of you, and I'm not the only one. All those who know the truth love you in the same way. And in the first, I think it's 6 verses, 5 times he references love and truth. And so something about her and the situation that she was fostering was just really relevant to that church there. And using this phrase, chosen by God or elect, means actually chosen in the scriptures. And so she was a Christian. And of course, we know that as a reference to Ephesians chapter 1 about being chosen and choosing to follow God and become a Christian. But I find her fascinating because it was her circle of influence. So again, going about her life, living her life. But it references in this letter about her children, about the local church, there was a greeting from the people who loved her sister, who said to say hello to her. So she had influence even beyond the local community. And she was clearly very close to the apostle, and was seeking, he was instructing her around just stand for the truth, and don't even open your home to someone, like put boundaries in place. It's okay to do that. Like, so she was clearly hospitable. But he was saying, like, here's where the line is drawn. Like, don't open your house to people who are rejecting Jesus, you know. But I'm encouraged to hear that some of your children are following the truth. So she was clearly in the middle of that, which I thought was really powerful. In verse 2, he talked about being anchored on the truth of Jesus. He calls her in verse 5, dear lady. And he says in verse 6, love means living the way he commanded us to live, and you should live a life of love. And it was almost like he's reinforcing who she already is and what she already knows. And so just as I kind of thought about that practically, it was just that she was clearly supporting John in the church. She had influence over others. She was called that elect lady. She was willing to receive advice. My best friend and I talk a lot about, we're both 48, 49, and we're like, what kind of old ladies do we want to be? You know, because we've got to start preparing now. We want to be the people that everyone wants to come to their house. Not everyone is like, oh no, they're a burden. And it starts now. She was hospitable, and I loved that she was able to reason about truth and love. I think a lot of women in the church will tend to take the back seat because we don't participate in public worship, and yet there are so many powerful ways that we have influence. We have an elderly woman who became a Christian at Miss Jackie is from Jamaica originally, and she became a Christian, I think, at 73. And to watch her grow and flourish over the last 4 years has been beautiful. But the little things she does, like there's always cough drops in the foyer that everyone counts on. And when the cough drops are gone, everyone notices. She still comes and comes to all the potlucks and is a presence that everyone finds calming. Like there's little things she does and everyone loves her and comes to her for advice. So those were some of the things that stood out to me about her.
I love the similar connection y'all made with both those women. They were just living their life.
Mm-hmm.
They were just living what God put in their hands, and we know very little about either one of them, and yet we can really draw a lot of comfort and I think confidence from them that whatever God has given me, I just have to live my life to the fullest for Him.
And I would suspect, we don't know this for sure, but I doubt she had a husband, because I would think John would have written to her husband in that time. And so for her to be someone,
if she did, he probably wasn't a Christian, but he probably would have still mentioned something. Yeah.
So it was clearly this network of women, because her sisters mentioned too.
Yeah.
Who were moving and influencing but respecting their roles too, which I thought was interesting. They weren't living out loud as the world tells us today. They were being who they should be in Christ and still influencing and impacting.
Good point.
Kristiana, I like the way you put that women are sometimes given the back seat, and that that doesn't mean that you give up your ability to be discerning and to exercise your understanding of the scripture and how you apply it. Just because you're not asked to do it in a public way doesn't mean that that what you're coming up with isn't just as good as somebody who preaches it.
Yes. And in fact, here we have an apostle who refers to himself as the elder, depending on her. I mean, that's amazing, right? And I always think about that. Like, how can we've been going through the process of selecting elders for our congregation. And so we've been revisiting that a lot. And some of the elders from Embry Hills, another church, had come and done some sessions with us. And one of the things they talked about is not being a burden on the elders or the leaders. And so how do we as women be that joy for them to multiply the glory of God, like you said, Colleen, and not the other way around? So
really good.
That lady was. And we can tell because John is having to tell her, look, put some boundaries in place. If people aren't busy working for the Lord, that's not a conversation you have to have.
Right.
Conversation you have to have is get to work. Come on.
Yeah.
But it's only when people are busy for the Lord that you have to say, okay, but let's think about how that needs to happen. And I would, having been kind of tangential with church leadership in the past, I would much rather have somebody who's on fire and working and doing, and to have to say, okay, let's rein that in a little bit, rather than having to light a fire under somebody.
Yeah.
Any day.
Yeah.
Okay, Colleen, who have you got to share with us?
Well, I chose the worthy woman of Proverbs 31.
Okay.
So I'm not going to read that whole section. I will cite some verses, but if you're wanting to follow along, it would be Proverbs 31, starting in verse 10 and going through verse 31 is where she's talked about. I love this. I love this woman. I think this is, it doesn't say how old they are, the couple, or how old she is, but I think that maybe they might be a little older because in verse 23, it says her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So I'm thinking you don't do that when you're 20, 25. That's my guess.
Probably even 30.
Yeah. So also in verse 28, her kids are old enough to rise up and call her blessed. Right. So that makes me think that maybe she
means they're past 25 because, kids don't grow up till they're 25.
Yeah.
Right, Christy?
Yeah. They're old enough to have an opinion about their mother and old enough for that to have been included. So anyway, so I want to look, I'm going to take Kristiana's lead and look at her influence on others and think about how we can emulate her and use our influence throughout adulthood and even in old age to raise or help raise a worthy woman or man from infancy. She teaches us how to accomplish a lot. I don't think anybody would argue with that, but she also knows how to ignore a lot. Mm-hmm. This no doubt contributes to the reason her husband trusts her. It's just easier for all of us to feel secure with a persevering mate. He knows that inconveniences will not stop his wife from managing her work and her integrity. Distance doesn't get in the way of her procuring groceries. She chooses at the groceries she chooses as she brings her food from afar. That's verse 14. And what about, you think of how people bring up excuses for not doing what they need to do or not improving their contribution to, say, their work in the kingdom or in whatever they're doing. Darkness, no problem. Getting up very early in the morning, not a consideration, as she also rises while it is yet night. Verse 15. I have trouble doing that. She does it. Do the elements slow her down? No. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. That's verse 21. Any of these factors could be excuses for deferring or begging out of work. And this woman doesn't make excuses and she doesn't shrink from reaching decisions, even complicated ones where she could lose money. When I come up, when I'm then thinking about through something I'm trying to do, and then I come up against this question about, well, I could lose money, or I don't know how to do this, or I'm going to have to figure out how to fix some tech problem. And then I go and I go and eat, a cookie because I don't want to. I don't want to figure this stuff out. So, but she pushes ahead and she considers a field and buys it. And she doesn't just buy it. She doesn't just buy stuff. She has profits, and she doesn't take those profits and just go be a consumer with them. She invests in a vineyard. She buys a vineyard. That's verse 16. One factor that bolsters her confidence is planning, which requires work. The bread of idleness, verse 27, is not on her menu. Okay, so bring these considerations to your child as you're rearing children. So this is older women teaching younger women. So I'm talking to either people who are rearing their own children or grandmothers with their husband are helping with the grandchildren. A lot of people do that. So these are some things to think about. To instill this kind of a can-do philosophy, parents can't be sissies. If you're looking for a reason to avoid doing what you should do, you will find one. Examine yourself and see what kind of example you are. If your parents didn't have a strong work ethic, or if they were soft individuals, it may be more difficult for you to recognize a lack of self-discipline in yourself. And that's what she's self-disciplined. She's so self-disciplined that she thinks outside the box and goes and says, okay, I made some money here. Where can I invest it? Let's go buy a vineyard. Let's make some money off that and bring some more money. Let's make money off the money we have. You can what you can do if you don't really know what to do to make yourself more self-disciplined so that you can rear self-disciplined children. Maybe you have a family member or a friend who can exemplify what you want to be. It could be somebody that came from another era, as Dana was talking about, when there was patience for neither life's obstacles nor weaklings, like the Great Depression era or World War II era. And so maybe somebody like that. You're not that way, but you want to be that way. Make this person your role model, or even a mentor if they're willing to do this, and then let them do it. Let them do it. Don't keep shrinking from their challenges to be proactive and courageous. So that's my 2 cents for today. And that is the Proverbs woman in Proverbs 31, the worthy woman.
And I think when we look at those are some super practical things for everyday life. I mean, that's what she teaches us. But there's a spiritual undertone there that's what God expects out of us as Christians, is being working for him, which idleness is, the old saying, idleness is the devil's workshop. That's not in the Bible, in case y'all didn't know, but ladies, but I've heard people tell me that's in the Bible, but it's not in the Bible, but the principle is, and that is something when we are idle. And that is what we're seeing so much in this generation today is, they're not idle, they're on their screens. Well, that's idleness. And I know if you're working today, you're on your screen working a lot. But hopefully there's a difference in what you're doing versus sitting, getting in trouble on the screen. And we need to teach our children to not be idle. They need to be productive. And in doing that, when we are productive physically, that's going to fall over into our spiritual productivity as well.
I think as I was listening, first of all, Colleen, I feel like it's the best teachings I've ever heard around the Proverbs 31 woman. There's proof more women need to teach about Proverbs 31 women. But I was thinking that I agree with you, Mom, or Dana, but she's also my mom. I agree with you, Mom, that yes, it's the idleness and productivity, but to what point? And I think that's a lot of what's missing in the example we see from how Colleen called out. She had a purpose. Yes. And knew what her purpose was, and she knew the why behind her purpose. And so that's why she wasn't productive
Just to be productive.
perspective, and as Christians, like, we know why, hopefully we know why, is to bring glory to God and bring more people closer to Jesus, and so it's to what point, like, everything is redirected, and that's what you see through her
Good point.
and all of that.
Yeah.
And her family recognized that too, right? At the end of Proverbs 31, it talks about her family praises her because they recognize what she's doing and the value that she brings for the family, but also for those outside the family.
Yeah. And, don't we see this meshing of God's plan for humankind is family and relationships, and the working together, the family of God, the nuclear family, but it's all these relationships. And in doing that, we glorify God, as you said, Kristiana. Yeah, good points, lady. Good points. Well, I want to talk briefly about the lady Naomi. And we may not know, well, I know y'all know who Naomi is, but some of our listeners may not be familiar with the name Naomi. But you're probably more familiar with Ruth, since there's a book in our Old Testament called Ruth. And Naomi was Ruth's mother-in-law. Now, we all know the mother-in-law jokes and so on and so forth. This is an amazing relationship. And Naomi was Ruth's mother-in-law. They met in the country of Moab. Naomi was from Israel, but she had left with her husband and her 2 sons during famine to go to the far country of Moab, and they lived there during that time. And during that time, the 2 sons married women from Moab, and so Ruth was one of the wives of one of the sons. Eventually, the husband of Naomi died. Then the 2 sons died. Now you've got not one widow, you've got 3 widows. You've got 1 elderly widow and 2 daughter-in-laws. And for most of us, we know what would have happened. The daughter-in-laws would have headed the other direction and left mother-in-law to fend for herself. But these daughter-in-laws didn't do that. They held closely to Naomi. And it's fascinating to me in the story, in the text, in the first chapter, it's very obvious that they probably spent about 10 years living together, caring for each other. And at some point, Naomi decided it was time for her to go home. The scriptures don't tell us exactly what her reason was. I think we can infer some things. I don't know that we can necessarily infer them, but I think we can make some assumptions that she was getting older. It was time to go home. And these women, these daughters needed to get on with their life. And she felt that perhaps she felt she was a burden to them. And I think we see Naomi always looking out for the best for these 2 girls and what she felt was the best. And so she encouraged them to go home, go back to their father's house, and there they could start over. And of course, we know in that time period, being a widow, you had no children, you had no husband, you were assigned to a very, very meager existence. If they went back home, they would have their fathers, their brothers to help take care of them. So she encouraged them to do that. And she told them, I'm going back to my country. I'm sure she had family there she could depend on. And so she was going to leave, and they were like, no, no, no. And I mean, this was a sobbing fest. They were not going to do that. In fact, it seems they all 3 went out on this journey together to go, and they get to the border of her country, and she tells them, no, y'all go home. One does choose, Orpah goes on home, but Ruth refuses. And she says in chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, and I'm just going to read these verses Many of you are familiar with them, but they're so beautiful. Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge." Now think about that. They're widows. So what's the lodging going to be like? She said, "Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me and more also if anything but death parts you and me." Now that is a mother-daughter commitment, a close mother-daughter commitment. But this wasn't a mother and daughter. But yes, this was a mother and daughter. She loved her like her own daughter. The daughter loved her like her own mother. And I love how she says, "Your God will be my God." How did she know who her God was? Obviously, Naomi had taught her. And she had taught her well enough that Ruth was willing to give up her gods in Moab for the one true God. And she follows her. And our point is not to go through the whole story. It is a beautiful story. It is a short book. I encourage you to read it. If you haven't read it, it's an easy read, a very easy read. But Naomi teaches her, advises her, tells her, "You listen to me, my daughter, and these things will go well for you." She encourages her to meet Boaz, who was part of their family and under their customs. Eventually, Boaz asks Ruth, who's a Moabite, to marry him, and they have a child who becomes the grandfather of King David. Now, what does that mean? That means that Ruth, a Moabite, is now in the lineage of Christ and is listed in the lineage in the New Testament. And that all came back to this obscure widow who was just living her life just like all these other women that we've talked about. And yet, how she glorified God. And in chapter 4, verses 14 and 15, towards the end of this book, as Naomi is holding and nursing, taking care of her new grandchild, the women of the community say to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nurturer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her bosom, and became a nurse to him. What a beautiful story. And what a powerful story about building relationships, about making sure you love your daughter-in-laws. You love those who come in your life. You love your son-in-laws, whomever God has put in your life. You know, I have 2 daughter-in-laws. I don't have a son-in-law because my daughter sitting there is never married. I have 2 daughter-in-laws, and I vowed I was going to have a good relationship with them. And you know, and I do love my daughter-in-laws. That they've been married. One of them have been married almost 30 years. The other one, I think it's 27 years this year. And they are very precious to me. They're almost as precious to me as my daughter is. And I love them dearly. But, you know, they're not the girls I would have chosen for my sons. They're just not, because they're not exactly like our family. And I have said to them, and I'm sure your mama wouldn't have chose my sons for you. And I think that's what we need to always remember when a couple comes together. It's somebody from this family that was raised one way, somebody from another family, and they have to come together. And it is upon us as older women, as mother-in-laws, to help make that relationship work. And that's work. That is work. And we see Naomi live this life and loved, which is, and I believe this is that agape kind of love. She loved these girls, and she loved what she wanted, what was best for them. She wasn't looking what was best for her. She was looking out for what she thought was best for them. And that's what we have to do in any relationship. And I just think she's a powerful example of that kind of love. Anybody have any comments about Naomi before we?
Well, she was showing that kind of love despite not having an easy life herself.
Yeah.
In chapter 1 and verse 20, they go back to Bethlehem, and all of the women say, "Oh, look, it's Naomi. She came back home." And she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because God has made my life bitter." She is in the throes of deep depression, understandably.
Yeah.
And even in the middle of all that, is able to step outside of herself and do what's best for her daughters-in-law.
Yes, good point. Very good point. Yes.
And this is an example of thinking, things have gone from bad. First, there's a famine. Then my husband dies. Then my son dies. Then the other one dies. This is awful. I mean, she just can't see very far, and there's no hope. But she ends up in this blessed position in the end.
Yes. And that just circles right back. We can just circle right back to Anna. Circle right back to Anna, who became a widow very young.
The elect lady who would have been living in that time of persecution.
Yes.
And that's something that I think both Naomi and what Colleen talked about, well, and I guess all of them, is that, like, I hear a lot of young women today on the most easy, basic things. They think the issues are so insurmountable. And it's like, that's the whole point of life. Like, as Christians, our hope is in heaven. This world is not our home.
Yes.
And so we need that we need to toughen up.
Yes.
And do the hard things and be disciplined and work.
Yeah.
And so just those character traits are an outflow of working unto the Lord in whatever role he gave us, those little moments, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and tying this all back to Still Got My Bling. How old was Naomi? She wasn't young. We don't know how old, but she wasn't young. And yet here she is. Now she's a nursemaid to her grandchild, which I'm sure she was very happy to be. But my point is, as she aged, she didn't quit working and glorifying God. The elect lady didn't quit glorifying God. Anna didn't quit glorifying God at their older ages. We don't know how old the virtuous woman was, but she was older, and that I have no reason to think as she became elderly that she quit glorifying her God. No. We all have work we can do. And, ladies, if it's simply no more than what we're doing here tonight, aren't we glorifying God by just, if there was no one listening, we're growing with each other. And I think that is so important. And I just want to close with two scriptures, Titus 2, verses 3-5, which most of us are very, very familiar with. This is where Paul is writing to Titus, the young preacher, and he's giving him instructions. And he says, older women are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good. Oh, you mean I have to still be teaching? And he says, and to train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands. And there's a reason, so that the word of God will not be blasphemed. I think he kind of really sums up this whole book in that very last phrase, that the word of God not be blasphemed. And that's what this whole thing is about. We need to continue to have our bling, our influence, however that comes out in me. But I can use whatever abilities or talents God has given me to glorify him. And that's what it's all about, so that God's word is not blasphemed. But and this doesn't say just certain women other than the older women. And we're all older than somebody. Even my daughter is older than somebody. We all need to be teaching the younger generation and influencing them, however that looks. And that doesn't mean I have to be teaching like you and I are doing tonight, but that means I have to be influencing those in my circle of influence. And that may be as small as the temple was for Anna, or as large as the life of the virtuous woman who is going afar, and et cetera, et cetera. But we all need to be influencing where we can. And then I want to close with Psalm 92, 12 through 15. It says, the righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They're planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. They still bear fruit in old age. Okay. They are ever full of sap and green. We think of that only as the young twig. But that's not true. So declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Amen to that. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you have nothing else to add, ladies, then we're going to say goodnight, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.